Hello and welcome to the Human Talk Podcast, the podcast where humans talk. This is an interview-style podcast where I ask our guests questions about anything and everything. I am your host, Jacob Walker, and today I'm joined by Peter May. Peter, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well, man. It's been a long day today, but I'm excited to be a part of this.
That's so awesome. Peter is a graduate from the University of California who is currently on a transcontinental adventure, biking from California to Massachusetts in the hopes of learning more about the U.S.'s rich history. He is also trekking this journey to raise money for the San Lorenzo High Environmental Club. So, Peter, what started you on this campaign?
The instigator, so I graduated from college a year early, so all of my friends just graduated like maybe 3 weeks ago now. And so they were talking as a celebration of their graduation of road tripping across the US. But I know my college friends. I know they're going to bail. I know they're unreliable. So I was like, okay, sure, whatever. You know, you guys do this road trip. And if it works out, then I will meet you on the other side of the US and we will road trip back together. And then about, 2 weeks ago, naturally they bailed as anticipated. So I'm not, overly bummed about it. It did get me on this trip in the first place. I've had a great time. So I really have nothing to be bummed about at all. But instead, my parents are going to fly out to Boston. They'll meet me there. That's like what started the whole idea. If I'm going to be biking across the U.S., I really wanted to be able to support something that would be local. And, I could have wrote for like St. Jude's or UNICEF or whatever, but those organizations are so big already, they don't need any promotion. And I felt it would be more rewarding and impactful for myself and also the students that I'm writing for to do something that was much more local and much more meaningful to me.
On the topic of that, what is the San Lorenzo High Club? What do they do? How do we support them? All the stuff like that.
They're they're called the Druids, and they're essentially the San Lorenzo environmental focused club. The issue that they've been experiencing is for several years now, they've been raising a lot of their money and funds that they're able to work and use for different projects with acquiring plants and propagating and all that stuff. They've been raising this funds through plant sales, largely at a particular event called the Bringing Back the Natives Garden Tour. And unfortunately with COVID, which has impacted so many things, this is one of them where that garden tour has now gone online. And so for people who relied on that tour to provide a spot for plant sales, it's been a struggle to raise money. In addition to that, the teacher that founded the club just retired. He can't recruit students to his club the way he could before, and he's still involved through volunteer work, but he's no longer on campus. And then the final issue is that with COVID, students also aren't on campus. So it's just kind of hard to maintain an active club of this type where, you have to kind of be on campus working with these plants, working with these groups that are restoring wetlands and focusing on environmental outreach and community education when you can't be on campus and when the students aren't on campus either. And so the money that I'm raising is going to go towards creating a paid internship where students can participate in this club. And if they are active members, they can get paid to do this. Because with COVID, and particularly in places like San Lorenzo, they have a high population that are first generation students. And so a lot of these students, if they go to college, they will be the first in their family, but often they are prevented or at least limited by needing to support their families, and especially at times like now where it's so essential that their parents are supported because they may have fallen on particularly difficult times. Students are, instead of doing clubs and extracurricular activities, they are instead working to help support their family, which is entirely understandable. But if we can create a way to allow them to do extracurriculars while still supporting their family, that is my goal with this trip and the money that I'm raising.
And do you know, I'm pretty sure the benchmark is $5,000. That's the goal that you're going towards. Do you know how much you've raised so far?
Yeah, I think I've got, last time I checked, I think I've got over $4,000. And $5,000 would be really nice if it gets a long ways. But really, it's if I could raise more than $5,000, that's just the realistic number that I knew that I could achieve. If I could raise more than that, it's all going to go to the kids and just allow more students to get more of these internships for longer, because we want to be able to ride on this for as long as possible because we don't know what's going to happen with COVID. And it sounds like now with the Delta variant becoming more of an issue, and I'm from California, and we in California just mandated masks again. So things are kind of getting worse. And it sounds like it may be more difficult and may require that students are be off campus longer than we initially anticipated. So it'd be nice to earn more, or not earn, but raise more than $5,000 so that we can provide these internships for longer. And especially in communities like San Lorenzo, which has a lot of Hispanic and African American students, a large part of their population is still unvaccinated. So it might even be longer for San Lorenzo, particularly if they're able to go back to school safely. So we'll have to see. I'm hopeful, but it would be nice to be able to maintain these as long as possible.
Absolutely. And if anybody listening wants to go donate, the donation link will be in the description along with on Peter's website. Peter's website also is in the description. Please go donate to this charity. It's a very noble cause. It's something not a lot of people think about. When charities are talked about, we always help the people that are in need. But what we don't realize is that nature is also in need. The world is on fire, and there's not a lot of people helping. And this man is doing something to change that. If the world is on fire, we're going to say Peter May has a bucket, and it's full of water. And he's currently pouring the water on the world.
It's a very apt description for California.
Yeah, California's on fire right now, isn't it? What did you need to do to prepare for this continental campaign?
My background is all in mountain biking, so you have to take this with a grain of salt because mileage on mountain biking versus road biking is hard to compare. But my longest ride was about 47 miles before my first day of this trip. And then my first day of this trip, I rode 113 with my fully loaded touring bike. I rode semi-regularly. I coach for the mountain biking team I used to race for when I was in high school, but I really hadn't rode for several years until COVID hit. Biking is one of those sports that you can really do well while COVID's going on because it's really easy to stay socially distant.
You're going so fast the COVID can't catch up, you know?
Yeah, you would hope so. I played ultimate frisbee and coached and captained all throughout college, but team sports, of course, were all shut down, and that's when I returned to biking. So I kind of rode with this team that I ride with and coach for, but our rides really kind of max out around 30 miles and don't go much above that. It's mountain biking, so it's less efficient than 30 miles on the road. I just kind of ran into it full steam, and I was lucky. I kind of burned out actually when I was going to the Sierras because it was one day of pretty flat riding, which is my 113-mile day. And then the days after that was where it became really mountainous, and that's where it kind of hit me that I might have been a little bit ambitious with my start. It is kind of incredible, though, how quickly your body adjusts to putting on miles every single day, day after day after day. So while I probably shouldn't have started quite as vigorously as I did, it really didn't bite me too bad the next few days. It was more the heat in California that did.
Yeah, I can't imagine being like unprotected on a bike in the summer heat. How is that?
I'm also like fairly paranoid about the sun, just for like radiation and skin cancer purposes. So I was thinking like, what am I going to do to mitigate that concern? And so I was thinking sunblock, which is the normal solution. And I just knew that like, I'm going to sweat all day. It's going to run off. I'm not going to want to apply it every hour. So what I do is I wear clothes from head to toe. So I have sun sleeves on my arms. I've got sun sleeves on my legs. I've got a bandana. I've got a neck gaiter, and I use the bandana and neck gaiter together because the neck gaiter leaves like a little triangle of exposed skin between my jersey and the neck gaiter. I use the bandana to cover that. And then I have a hat to protect my scalp. So like you cannot see any skin on me. And while that works well to protect me from, damage from radiation from the sun, it does get extremely hot. When I was riding those first few days in the Sierras, my GPS recorded 124 degrees, which it's not that hot in the air, but that's like the heat that's like also, it's kind of sitting in the sun all day, but it's also like heat reflecting off of the like pavement or tarmac that I'm riding on, which is all black, so it absorbs. And so that's when it like really gets hot. It's when you're riding on that stuff all day, especially uphill, because then you can't have like the self-generated breeze you'll get when you're just cycling on flats or downhill. So that's where it gets really brutal, is uphill on hot days.
Did you ever worry about like getting heat stroke from all the clothes that you were wearing? Did you have a constant like supply of water with you?
I ran out of water several times. I was probably in the most serious danger of stroking out in Utah because there was a heat wave that hit the West. And so I was riding in 118-degree weather, 114-degree weather. That was not just the tarmac, that was the actual air temperatures. And that was just brutal. So I ran out of water traveling from Hanksville past Goblin Valley to Green River. I ran out of water on that stretch. And I was planning on doing some dirt riding to get to Green River, but I realized that being out of water and I potentially could collapse. And I did not want to collapse in the desert in the middle of nowhere where no one was going to find me. So I stayed on the highway, even though I knew that was going to lead to an interstate. And so I ended up riding on the interstate for about 14 miles, and I just kind of like stumbled through the gas station door. And at the end of big days, I kind of get fried in my brain. Like I'm just kind of a little bit out of it, but I was entirely out of it, and people could tell something was wrong. I was going into this gas station. People like talked to me. That's the most people have talked to me this whole trip was when I got to this gas station and like beelined to like the soda fountain, filled up my water bottle with, usually I can get free water at these soda fountains, but it turned out their normal water was broken. So I ended up getting carbonated water. And I don't like carbonated water, but that was the best water I've ever had in my whole life. I just sat and like recuperated for an hour and a half at this gas station. And then I was like thinking about somewhere to stay and camp, and everywhere was full in Green River. So I had to bike another 20 miles that day to get to this truck stop outside of Moab. Crescent Junction truck stop. If you're going to stay a night at a truck stop, that's a good one.
Go to that one. I
really haven't had a single day under 80 degrees. 80 degrees is like, oh man, it's 80 degrees. That's pretty cool.
It feels good out here. It feels nice. It's breezy.
Yeah, exactly. Until the last 2 days when I've finally reached the Atlantic. So right now I'm in New York City, where I'm doing this interview from. It's really only been overcast and not, oh, that's not true. It has been under 80 degrees when it has hailed on me.
It's hailed on you?
That has been the only exception to that rule.
Please tell me about that now. What was that whole experience? Where were you? What happened?
That was probably one of the most dangerous situations I've been on the whole trip. So my background, as I said, is in mountain biking. And so as a part of this trip, I bought specifically a gravel bike so that I could have the option of going off-road. I decided I was going to do a chunk of the Colorado Trail. I did the chunk that goes from Breckenridge, comes out south of Golden, Waterton Canyon. I think it's segments 5 through 1. The Colorado Trail, for anyone who doesn't know, is a backpacking trail that they allow bikes on some segments of. They don't allow you to go through the wilderness segments, but everywhere else is fair game. And it's notoriously one of the most difficult bike packing routes because it's designed as a backpacking trail, not for bikes. So there's like sections of the trail where it's miles of just walking your bike because it's way too steep or it's too muddy or too rocky to ride on. And so it's got this like brutal reputation for people who have suspension. And my gravel bike is rigid, so it has no suspension at all. And I decided I wanted to do this trail. So I was doing this trail. It's fairly remote for large sections of it. In Colorado in the summer, as I'm sure you're familiar with, it tends to have these like little showers in the afternoon. And they last like, maybe at most like 30 minutes or something. And then it becomes clear again. I'd experienced this for the previous week as I was riding from Salida to Breckenridge and towards Salida. I'd anticipated, that it's raining and it's about to rain again. And I'm like, okay, well, it's just going to rain again for maybe at most 30 minutes. It's going to clear up and I'll just be able to keep riding. So I hid underneath this tree for a bit while the rain started. And then it waited about 25 minutes and it was just getting colder and colder and colder. And I realized, I just kind of had to keep moving because I was just losing body temperature. So I set off into the rain. At this point, it really not done like the light drizzle in the afternoon that I was familiar with. It just kind of
it was like a downpour.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought like, it must nearly be over because it's been 25 minutes. They only last like 30 minutes. So it's going to be over soon and I'll be fine and it's going to be good to go. So I set off into the rain, and that was a pretty massive mistake because it then rained for about another hour and a half straight. It was hard rain, and then it hailed. I didn't have to like ride through any hail. There was no hail on the trail itself because it all got washed away by the river that the trail had become. So I
Oh.
had lots of hail blanketing all the sides of my trail, but nothing on the trail itself. The kind of rock that you're riding on up there, it's like kind of sandy as opposed to really dirt. So it wasn't too muddy to ride. Sand just kind of gets in all the components of your bike. So I was just having like worries about mechanical issues, and I'm just getting colder and colder, and the rain's not stopping. And even though I'm moving and generating heat that way, when you head downhill, you can't generate heat because you can't pedal. So you really want to be climbing in these kind of conditions. I ended up heading downhill a bit. I was just so incredibly cold, and I was shaking. Everything was completely soaked on me and my bike, and I just really lucked out on the trail crossing over a highway. I just knew it wasn't going to make it the next 25 miles on my bike in the rain with all of this gear that was soaked and me being as cold as it was. So I decided to hitchhike that section into a city, and I decided I was going to give up on the Colorado Trail, or if I could manage it, I would bike up the next day if it wasn't raining and then finish the trail then.
Did you ever get to finish the trail, or was it raining?
I did. I met some awesome people, Ron and Lorraine. They picked me up from the side of the road. They had this like immaculately clean SUV, and there I am, as covered in all the mud I could possibly be that wasn't washed off by the rain and water.
You probably look like Pigpen from Charlie Brown. You had like the fake dust cloud around you and everything.
Oh yeah, no, I totally was. I would be happy if I looked anywhere near as clean as he does. And my bike is all, covered in sand and dirt and muck as well. My goal is to just look as pathetic as possible on the side of this highway so that someone would be inclined.
It's like a puppy. It's like somebody seeing a puppy in a box. They're like,
oh, yeah.
We have to help it out, honey.
Exactly. And it worked. I stole the hearts of Rod and Lorraine. So they ended up driving me that whole distance. And I'm in this superheated car. They took me to Sonic for the first time.
Wait, you'd never been to Sonic before?
I had never been to Sonic before. We don't really have those in California all that much that I'm aware of.
Was it any good?
The fries were really good. The hot dog was fine. I feel like I'm almost obligated to go there again and try like a burger because I have to get the full Sonic experience.
Right, you gotta get everything.
Yeah, and they recommended the tater tots, but I really did enjoy the fries. So they also Lorraine worked for a bakery, but it was closed. However, they were baking stuff for the next day, so she like snuck in there after hours, like brought me a freshly baked cinnamon roll and a scone that had like broken one edge so that it was not sellable. And I just got all that stuff for free. It was awesome. I got picked up by the best people to be hitchhiked.
That is the best possible hitchhiking experience. They buy you Sonic and give you pastries?
It doesn't get much better than that. But even though I was in this heated car and we did all these things and they drove me this, long distance way past where they were going, I was still shaking from head to toe by the time we arrived at my warm showers host, which is why I mentioned that I think it was probably the most dangerous, potentially one of the most dangerous parts of my whole trip is I didn't really realize how low my core temperature must have gotten because I just was not heating up. Yeah, I took off a lot of my, wet clothes as much as I could while still being somewhat decent and back. And I was still just so cold. That was my hail experience, but I haven't been cold ever. I sent back all of my cold weather gear just a few days later when I was leaving Colorado. My hosts for that night, they knew I was coming in. They had like pizza ready and all that stuff, which it was awesome. You'd be surprised. I mean, I don't know if you'd be surprised, but people are just so great to people, to cyclists on the road. I think they take a lot of pity on you.
Okay, in big cities, people get really mad at cyclists when they're like in their way. But then when you see a cyclist fall over, you're like, oh no, I need to help them. I don't understand where that contrast changes, where it's from, get out of my way! I don't know where it goes. Where did you stay for most of the nights? Like, was it an Airbnb? Did you rent a hotel room? Where did you go after you got to the places you need to go on the journey?
So on the west side of the US, where it's dry, I didn't care all that much whether I had like a house to stay in or if I was going to camp out because I've got a full camp set up or whatever. It didn't really matter to me too much. So there's this website called Warm Showers, which to anyone familiar with the website Couchsurfing, it's basically the same thing, but for cyclotourists specifically. And Couchsurfing is an app where people will offer to let you stay at their places for free for like a very short period of time because you are either traveling through, or you're backpacking or whatever. It's like a broader Warm Showers because it's just any kind of like travel, short-term stay, people let you do it for free. So I used a lot of Warm Showers, but that's really, it's as the name would indicate, it's like, I'd go there when I had to shower, especially when I was on the West. I wasn't trying to abuse it there. Then I got to the East, and you guys, it's just, there's so much humidity in the East. Where I met you, where you're not from, but where I met you, and I think it was right when I got into Missouri.
It was right at Missouri. You crossed into Illinois, right at Chester. There's a little bridge right there, and there's a Popeye statue. And he bikes by. My grandma thought you looked scary because you had all your clothes on to protect from the heat. My grandma was like, "Oh, that guy looks scary." And I saw the back of your shirt, and I was like, "Wait, stop! I gotta talk to this guy."
Well, it's funny you should mention that because I am very conscious of the fact that I probably look very unapproachable because when I wear my full setup, I wear my neck gaiter like over my nose and tucked under my sunglasses because I don't want a single bit of skin showing on my entire body. I've got like socks that I've cut up and put around my wrists so that my arm sleeves don't like have any room between my arms and my gloves at all. Like, and it's just so I'm so careful with this stuff. And I hear other cyclists cars will like pull over and stop and offer them water. And I have never been offered any of that because I think I'm just so unapproachable generally with all of my gear
You definitely look like you're going to go rob a bank, but you don't have a car because you lost your license. So you're gonna rob a bank and put all the money in the bag on the back of your bike. That's what you look like when you're biking, and that's a compliment.
I'm not at all surprised. That's what I'm going for. If I've done that, then if I look like that, then I've done my setup correctly where you can't see anything about me. I've been told I look like the Invisible Man because, it's just like the exterior is where it looks like there might be someone underneath, but you would have no idea,
You wrap the bandage off your head and there's
my
just nothing there.
age, my race, nothing at all. Like, so yeah, I can understand people not, approaching me, and I have kind of desperately needed a couple of times, but I haven't actually, required it
Right,
yet.
yeah. So
I
even
don't
despite that, how many times have you hitchhiked and like gotten rides from people?
Two. There's the one time I got hailed on, and then the weather is just terrible when it comes to the ability for any apps that I use to forecast it when I started hitting more humid Midwest, easterly states. So when I was in Kansas, it said it was going to be fine until like 2 p.m. with no rain. And then it absolutely dumped rain at 9 a.m., right after I'd left my place I was staying for the night. So I just kind of biked this rain for as long as I could. Luckily, it's not anywhere near as cold as Colorado. So it wasn't a risk of freezing.
And it's flat, so it's a lot easier.
It is. So I'm just hiding out under the shelter. My forecast says it's going to rain until, I think like 7 p.m. that night. And it's maybe 11 or if that, maybe like 10 when I was able to find the shelter. So I was going to sit there for hours. Then some guys up in this town that's got a population of like 30, but that means they're probably pretty aware of any outsiders that are coming in.
Right. They
so
see this guy covered in all black and they go, "Oh wait, he doesn't live here. Wait a minute."
Yeah, exactly. So they see me under the shelter. They're like, we could probably get you where you were trying to go. And I was trying to go more east at that point, but I kind of tried to have this purist attitude of like, I don't want to make progress east any way, shape, or form that's not on a bike. So I went south with them to a closer town that had a hotel, the closest town that had the hotel. And I just wanted to stay there, dry my stuff. And that's the only other time I've had to hitchhike. And then I was in the back of a police car.
Oh,
Um,
please do tell.
I was crossing over from Illinois, so pretty soon after I met you, because I only spent I think a day or two, I spent one day getting into Illinois and one day getting out of Illinois.
It's not a big
Uh,
state. It's not a big state to like bike through anyway. It's kind of small.
yeah, especially at that part in the southern area.
Yeah.
But I was biking from Illinois to Kentucky, and I was gonna go over this highway bridge, and I get over there, and the bridge is closed due to some kind of construction. And usually on a bike, I can basically get around any construction. It's more like things are closed for cars.
Right.
But this one had a car stationed there with his lights flashing, turning everyone away. And I talked to him. He's like, "No, you can't cross this bridge. You have to go 6 miles back to the interstate and cross on the interstate."
Man, that's awful.
So, yeah, it is. So I went over back to the interstate, and the interstate, there's so many more cars on it, which means there's a lot of crud on the side of the road. And when you're crossing over a bridge, there really isn't a shoulder. So that crud just gets piled up on like the 1 foot extra space that they have there.
Right.
And I was starting to bike over the bridge, and just as I started on the bridge, I got a nail went through my rear tire and destroyed the sidewall of my tire, and I couldn't repair it at the time, so I just had to walk over this like mile-long bridge crossing over the Ohio River to Paducah, Kentucky. Someone called the police because there's this moron walking on the bridge with his bike.
Yeah, and he's totally dressed in all black too.
Yeah. So I don't think it was particularly malicious of this person. I think they were probably more looking out for my safety because there's no shoulder. I'm at walking speeds. There's clearly something wrong because
you're carrying a bike, right? Yeah.
The bike. So the Kentucky police, they kind of saw me when I was just about to get off this bridge, and it's too loud on the interstate to really talk, but would they like try to indicate like, "What the heck are you doing, man?" And I just kind of pointed at my back tire. They got the message that something was wrong with my bike. So they crossed over to Illinois and spun around there and then came back on the, Illinois to Kentucky side of the bridge and pulled over for me. And we ended up getting my bike in their car, and they drove me to a bike shop. And then it turned out in all the rush to get me off of the interstate, we'd forgotten one of my bags back there. So then they drove back, which was like a 7-mile drive, and then pick up my bag and then drive that back to me. They were never going to give me a ticket, even when they didn't even know that the highway bridge that I was originally going to cross on was closed.
Right.
All of the police interactions I've had have been really good. That was the only other time I've had to hitchhike.
But do you feel powerful knowing you made a Kentucky police go to Illinois twice for you?
I do feel very powerful. I also feel exceptional in that I asked the bike shop, how many cycle tourists they get, and they said they get a fair amount. And then I asked how many do you get that roll up in the back of a police car, and they said I was the first. So I'm happy to have that accomplishment.
Were there 2 cops in the cop car, or was there only the driver?
There was 2, so I was in the back.
All right, I was gonna be like, if there was one driver, why didn't he just let you sit in the passenger seat?
I bet there's like legal reasons.
You know what I think? It's just because they don't want you hitting the siren. Like, you can sit up there as long as you promise not to hit the siren. You're all good.
I think there's a good chance. There are the ride-along programs, right? So it can't be that difficult to make it happen.
Speaking of your bike and all of the stuff that happened with it, what do you have on your bike that you take with you? Like, do you have a bag? I guess it's not waterproof. We learned that a couple stories ago. But what do you have with you? What did you start with? What do you have now?
When it comes to gear and bags, I've really tried to keep it as lightweight as possible. This is my first tour, but doing research for it, the general rule of thumb was to pack what you think you'll need, get it all together, cut that in half. And then they said often people really ought to cut that in half again. So I went all out on trying to keep it as small as I could. Mm-hmm. So I have a tent that straps onto my bars. I've got 2 really small bags that go on the forks of my bike in front. I've got a frame bag, which goes underneath my top tube, if you're familiar with bike terminology. I've got 2 top tube bags, which are both very, very small. And then I've got 1 big saddle bag. All those bags make for a very lightweight setup when it comes to cycle touring. Usually people have way more stuff than me. I've got 1 pair of underwear for this whole trip.
Wait, like one
which
pair you're wearing
indicates
or one pair extra?
one pair of underwear, period. Because what I usually wear when I'm riding are cycle bibs, which are kind of like wetsuits.
Ah,
You don't wear underwear with them. So I only wear the pair of underwear that I have on an off day, like when I'm walking around and I have my pants on as opposed to my cycling kit. And that's maybe the only thing I would add to my setup as opposed to subtract is I think I would add a pair of those really lightweight running shorts as like an
mm.
emergency pair of underwear, but also as a swimsuit because I don't have one of those, and I really kind of regretted that decision as well.
Oh, that would have been super fun to like say you could swim in every state that you visited.
That would be a fun challenge. That is a really good idea, actually, in the future.
Next summer, next summer. All right, you heard it here first.
Potential.
You talked about meeting, what was it, Ron, and who was the other one?
Lorraine.
Lorraine. I almost said Lolita, but I was like, that's definitely wrong.
Well,
Who else have you?
I forgot the name as well, so don't worry about it.
That's okay. That's all right. Who else have you met along the way? What like interactions have you remembered through this entire trip?
I have two other fun, really cyclists that I've met. Claudia, who is from Montreal, and Rob, who is from New York City. Before about an hour before this interview, what I was doing was hanging out with Rob, who I met in Utah, and he was biking towards the West Coast, so the opposite direction of me.
Oh.
We talked for like maybe 7 or 8 minutes just because we are going opposite directions on the road. We just stopped for each other. I just sent him a text saying, I made it to New York City. And he's like, well, hey, I'm free. And so we biked around the city for about 5 hours. He showed me, a lot of it because I'd never been here before. And New York City is entirely overwhelming. He just showed me all the cool spots. We went to Coney Island, Battery Park, and Wall Street, and he just navigated everywhere for me. So it was great to have a personal tour guide for the day. So he was really fun to meet. I met Sarah, who was one of my hosts in Boulder. She was amazing as well. We went on all kinds of adventures, and I stayed an extra day there with her. Then there's Claudia, the woman from Montreal. She's biking from Napa Valley all the way to Montreal and like going up the coast. She went through Virginia and nearly reached the water there, went to like Richmond, and now is going north up the coast of the US before she goes back to Montreal. I met her in Utah as well. Actually, Rob and Claudia and I really all met in the same spot because Claudia and Rob had just stopped and started talking to each other. And then I rolled up right after that and met them both. But Claudia was actually going in my direction. So we rode the next like week and a half or so together. And then I separated from her because I was going north to Breckenridge and doing the Colorado Trail. And her bike was not, capable of doing that.
Right, it was a road bike?
Yeah, it was a normal road bike with like panniers on normal bike setups, whereas mine, I've got no panniers. Panniers require like you have racks on your bike, and those are really prone to like breaking and coming loose when you're doing a lot of riding that's on the rough dirt kind of stuff. So it's just not advisable with that kind of setup. Her bike might have been capable, but not like the setup of her gear.
Right.
So we separated in Salida, Colorado, and I, was doing my slow progress on like mountain biking trails. And then after I finished that trail, I went right back into the Rockies again. I went over the Continental Divide and went to Winter Park, and I stayed there for 10 days doing some mountain biking races. And so at one point she was like more than 2 weeks ahead of me. But after I went east of the Rockies, I was just riding endlessly all day, every day. And I ended up catching up to her in Washington, D.C. So then we rode the next 2 days together, and we just separated because I was doing longer days again, but I spent more time in New York now. So we're probably going to finish.
Gonna meet up again, yeah. That is so cool. That is really cool.
Yeah, it was awesome to be able to run into her again, because I hadn't seen her for the majority of riding across the U.S. And then suddenly I've met up with her on the East Coast after, not seeing her since Colorado.
That's a lot of miles to like not know where anybody is and then to suddenly see him again.
Yeah, and I was also completely off of the normal route. I didn't really meet other cyclists for a long portion of my trip after Colorado because I was not on the established route.
Did you like map out a route, or is there like a universally accepted route that bikers go on to get across the country?
There is a universally accepted route. It's put together by the Adventure Cycling Association, also known as the ACA. And they have a whole bunch of routes, not just across the US, but they have it, different shorter routes. And there's like the Continental Divide, which goes from like Jasper, Canada, all the way down to somewhere in Mexico, or maybe it's the Mexico US border. So there's all kinds of these cool routes. That's all the Adventure Cycling Association. And I know it exists. And as it would turn out, like when I was planning my route, I would be like, oh, this is probably a good spot to ride. And then it turns out that was part of the ACA route. I would occasionally be on these routes, but I would plan everything myself. And then if it just turned out that great minds think alike and that route was a good one, I would end up on the ACA route.
Well, that is very neat. You're talking about riding endlessly, like going super fast. What does a day in the life of you look like during this journey?
So on the west side of the Rockies, I would maybe ride around 80 miles, maybe a little bit longer sometimes, especially in like Nevada where there's just not a whole lot. Then I would have time at the end of the day. I kept up a blog as long as I could. I would have time to do that. If I stayed at a house with a host, I would talk to them at the end of the day. And that was all pretty relaxing, a lot of fun, besides the heat wave. When I got east of the Rockies, then as soon as I wake up in the morning, I hate wasting time like cooking. So I ate a lot of like protein bars essentially, just as like breakfast and also lunch and also dinner. I just don't want to waste time with it. So I would get up, I would eat. I have also had like this homemade like trail mix. So I would try to spice things up with some of that. I would just eat that, pack up everything, and then go. And as soon as I would go, I would just don't stop. I don't really stop for anything besides bakeries, which I haven't missed a single one on my entire trip.
All right, then.
And
did they get you hooked in Colorado?
I did spend a lot of money in bakeries in Colorado, and especially in like Telluride and Winter Park where I raced. I also had every single bakery there. And my rule for that is, I don't have to go to bakeries if it's like a Safeway bakery. It's just does not matter. Cafes are cafes. They has to be marketed as a bakery. I would go to plenty of cafes anyways and get baked goods, but I was not like actually obligated to unless it said bakery.
Mm-hmm. On the sign, it has to say bakery.
Yes. And I haven't missed a single one that I'm personally. And also, it's like, I have to be aware of it existing. If I rode past it, I don't care if I didn't know it was there. But if I knew it was there,
right,
I would go without exception. I've successfully kept that up so far. I've gone to over 80 bakeries. I went to 6 in one day in Salida. So it's a mild addiction. Hopefully, by the time I'm done with this trip, I'll be so sick of bakeries, I will not just gain a massive amount of weight by eating.
No more muffins.
Anyways, yeah.
Now, just out of curiosity,
Uh-huh.
Can I ask, without any personal bias, what state has the best bakeries?
Colorado is definitely up there. I think when it comes to overall baked good experiences, it probably had the best in Colorado. Once you get east of Colorado, a lot of the bakeries are more like pie shops. I would say Colorado probably had the best bakeries, just like period. I had the best cinnamon roll of the trip there, and I had some really good European baked goods there, 2 different places. So yeah, Colorado.
All right. Like I said, no personal bias, none here whatsoever, but also I'm very happy to hear you say Colorado.
Well, I need it because when I got east of the Rockies, I put on the jet fuel essentially. So I would just ride from as soon as I'd wake up to about 10 minutes before it became dark. So I'm riding from about maybe 9 a.m. or earlier every single day until about 9 a.m. at night when it gets dark.
Mm.
And so I did 210 miles in one day through Kansas. And that was into a headwind the whole time, which if you're familiar with cycling at all, you're like headwind doesn't that's not going to be that big of a deal. It absolutely sucks as a
You
cyclist.
have to push, and
Um,
especially on flat land, you had nothing going for you.
yeah, and in Kansas, there's no trees, there's no shelter. It's just farmland, right? So there's nothing to stop this wind either. So that was pretty brutal, that 210 miles. The day before that, I did 130, and the day after that, I did 95, and then the day after that, I did 60. So that was actually a rest day. It was my 60-mile day. Um,
That's so many miles still. It's a lot of miles.
yeah. Then after that, I did 160 with 8,600 feet of climbing. So I just I just went, booked it east of the Rockies. I mean, there's only so many days of cornfields and farmland that I can stand, and I just wanted to get through it as fast as possible. So that's what my whole life looked like. It was just as soon as I get up, I ride all day. I stop at some bakeries for calories, and I go until it's dark, and then I either find a place to sleep or I camp out or whatever. And so I didn't have time to do anything else. So I stopped writing my blog at that point because I just didn't have time in the day to do it.
Right.
And I was just so exhausted at the end of these massive days.
Yeah,
I
I
was
can
just,
imagine. Biking 200 miles will definitely take it out of you.
yeah. But, it was fun because I got to catch up with Claudia again. I was 2 weeks behind, and then I ultimately caught her. So
It was worth it.
yeah, it was fun. It's been awesome riding with people again. It was off route, right? So I didn't really have anyone to ride with for this whole time. So now it's fun again.
So what did you do while you were biking? Was there any way that you like kept yourself entertained? Did you listen to music, or was it just focus on not falling over on these two wheels?
When I was west of the Rockies, I didn't listen to anything on my phone. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of traffic. It's not especially safe.
Mhm.
When you get east of the Rockies, I started to care a little bit less. The roads are pretty wide, they're not as traffic. There's good shoulders for a lot of them. So I like audiobooks a lot. I'm not a huge reader, but I am an avid audiobook listener even back home. They also weigh 0 pounds. So Claudia, for example, has 3 books with her, which I find ridiculous.
That's a
Um,
lot of extra weight.
yeah, just audiobooks weigh 0 pounds. I like
Are
that.
they survival guides, or are they just like
No, they're like Crime and Punishment is one of them.
that's such a
Um,
big book. That's really big
yeah,
book.
so that I just find it ridiculous. She's twice the man, at least twice the man I am. She's carrying way more weight, and she's riding through like way worse weather. And I know the second I'm like hear rain in the forecast, I'm like, okay, well, how am I staying inside as soon as possible? She's just trucking.
She's been like nonstop biking.
I think she's taken like maybe 6 this whole time. Well, I stayed like 10 days in Winter Park alone. Like, yeah, no, she's a trooper, that's for sure.
That's crazy.
Um,
Tell me more about your time in Winter Park. You said you did some mountain bike racing. Did you just like enter into the races, or what was that?
I coach for those kids back home that on the team I used to race for in El Cerrito, California. So these kids, they were telling me like, when they heard about this trip, they're like, oh, Peter, you have to go to the mountain biking nationals that are being held in Winter Park this year. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. Because I like did not expect it to work out time wise, because it's such a narrow window. I'm not going to wait around for races for a week.
Right, right.
I'm also just going to miss them for a week. There was no way it was going to work out time wise, and then there was no way it was going to be like close to my route. And as it would turn out, they were about at the right time, and they were not far from my route, because I was always going to climb up Mount Evans, which is the highest road in the US, and that isn't too far from Winter Park. I did both of those in one day. I rolled in there a couple days early so I could rest, because I've done such massive days and I need to rest your legs if you're going to do any kind of racing.
Right.
So I stayed with a warm showers host there who happened to know some people at a bike shop there. Those people bent every single one of their policies to allow me to race in the Winter Park races, because I wasn't going to be able to race my bike I rode there. It's not a mountain bike, so it's not even legal to race. So I was going to have to rent a bike. Rental bike shops do not want you racing their bikes because they fear for their safety of their bike and like you damaging it because you're really pushing it really hard.
Right.
But they were all aboard me racing their bike. They also don't allow you to take it to the Winter Park Resort, which is where the races are, but they didn't care at all for me. I was allowed to take it to the Winter Park Resort. They didn't charge me for 2 days as they tested out their bike and just rode it after their shop closed. They didn't rent out that bike once my settings were dialed in on it. They were like, it's just on reserve for you, so we won't change anything on it. They gave me a discount. It was like a full day rental, but they gave me a discount on a half day rental. That's all they charged me for the first race. I was only going to do one race, but I was the fastest in my category and also anyone over 18 in the non-championship races. And so I felt like I kind of deserved to get my ass kicked in the actual championship
You were
race.
obligated to go to the next stage. I get it.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like I couldn't just place first in non-championship and then not race against the guys that are like really, really, really good. And I knew I was gonna get totally destroyed. So I decided I would do one more race, and they didn't even charge me for the second race. And I know these are awesome guys at this bike shop. So I was hanging out with them at the end of every single day, getting food and like hanging out at their houses and apartments because I have nothing to do in Winter Park for these 10 days. But it was like the best decision on my whole trip was going to Winter Park.
So how'd you end up doing in the championship race?
I think there was 15 of us that started. I placed ninth. Percentage-wise, not that great.
Still, ninth? Really good. Like championship, ninth? That's like getting bronze in the Olympics. Everyone's like, oh, getting bronze is so bad. You're getting a medal at the Olympics still. I don't understand why you're getting mad at it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm racing against people from all over the country, all of these guys in my age categories. To get ninth when I haven't done any training and I hadn't raced in a single race since high school. So I was more than happy to place ninth.
That is crazy cool. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
No.
Why?
Because the bun is connected. If you broke that bun in half, then yeah, obviously it becomes a sandwich because that would be two buns or two halves, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas it's one hot dog bun, you know what I'm getting at with that?
So are Italian sub sandwiches not sandwiches? Like the sandwiches where they cut through the bread but not all the way?
Baguettes too. That does raise quite a confounding philosophical question, which I could write a thesis on as a philosophy major. You raise a very difficult question. I feel like I feel like there's a distinct difference. Maybe it's in the meat style of like a hot dog that would distinguish it from a sandwich, because you don't really have a hot dog as a like a meat option in a sandwich in any other form that I can think of. So maybe it's more of the meat that is the differentiator than the bun itself.
That's an answer nobody has said before, and I really like that answer. It's really good.
Well, that's what you get with your philosophy major. It's
okay, see, the philosophy major that bikes across the country has the best answers. What states did you bike through? I know, so you said California, Utah, Nevada, Colorado. What else?
It's a good thing I was just counting them today. So in total, I'm going to go through 18 states. I have already gone through California, Nevada, Colorado, Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Kentucky. From Kentucky, I went to West Virginia. From West Virginia, I went to Virginia and then to Maryland. From Maryland, I went to Pennsylvania, and then I crossed into Delaware for all of like 2 miles just to say I've been there and I never have to go there again.
It's
the state I forget about most easily existing. And then from Delaware, I went back into Pennsylvania, but then I went to New Jersey. And from New Jersey, I'm now in New York. From New York, I'll go to Connecticut, ride through Rhode Island, and then go to Massachusetts. And that's 18.
That's a lot. What do you think your favorite state to bike through has been so far?
I loved Colorado, man. Colorado was awesome, even though it also had one of the most, difficult experiences with the hail.
Right.
And in fact, I think if I lived in Colorado, I would much rather not live in the mountains like Breckenridge or Salida. I would much rather live in like a suburb of Boulder, because Boulder is just too expensive. At least I'd be a little bit lower then and maybe not have to deal with as much snow and hail and still have ready access to it. And you have some awesome mountain biking in Colorado, which is something that the rest of the U.S. doesn't have nearly as much. There's some in West Virginia, not as good. The Ozarks are all too kind of small to have a whole lot of good mountain biking. So yeah, I think Colorado is probably the most fun state to bike through.
What was your least favorite state to bike through?
Kansas, hands down. Kansas just sucks. So there's like this idea of prevailing winds where it's supposed to be easier to cross from the west to the east, which just lucked out for me because I had this romantic start to my trip where, being from the Bay Area, I was able to ride out of my front door and still dip my tire in the Pacific Ocean so that when I get to the Atlantic Ocean, I'll dip my tires there as well. I was able to do that from my front door, whereas most people have to like fly out to like the starting point.
Right.
The prevailing winds, I was like, oh, cool. I just lucked out and I have these winds that are going to carry me all the way across the US. And for the first 3 states, I would say that was the case. I got lots of tailwinds through California and Nevada and Utah. Colorado, there were some tailwinds, but there was at least no headwinds. The second I got out of Colorado, it's just headwinds. It's been in headwinds the entire time since then. And that's, the majority of the US. And so the wind comes up from the south. And my dad would just send me photos of like the wind charts of the US. And it would be like me right in the windiest area in the US in Kansas all the time. And it's just so brutal because there's just nothing out there. Yeah, Kansas just sucks to ride through.
Is there a big difference between like the Ozarks and did you bike through the Appalachians at all?
I did.
Is there a difference between those kind of mountains and the Rocky Mountains?
Yeah, I mean, the Rockies are definitely more, I would say probably more, well, probably just as a whole more impressive than the Sierras. But I have gotten the Sierras my whole life because I'm from California. So I kind of think of the Rockies as the Sierras too, even though it's probably better thought of as the other way around. They're both massive. You get to really high altitudes, over 10,000 feet pretty easily in both. Obviously in Colorado, very easily. You don't get anything like that in the Ozarks. The Ozarks in Colorado, because of how used to snow you guys are and how big the mountains are, all of the passes, they're like 10 miles long, but they have really low grades. So it's only like a 3 or 4 or 5% grade at most when you're climbing through the Rockies. But when you're climbing through the Ozarks, it's going to be like 18% grade up, 18% grade down on really short hills, and just over and over and over and over again. So in the Rockies and like Kansas in particular, you could see like on my speed chart for the day, it'd all be like about the same speed, consistent throughout the whole day. Whereas in the Ozarks, my speed chart looks like a saw because it's just up and down, because I'll go really slow going up these hills. So my speed chart goes down, and then I'm going down the hill. So then I'm going really fast for a short period of time because it's a really steep hill. And honestly, I like the climbing experience of the Ozarks and Appalachians more than the Rockies. I hate being on a climb for 10 miles that I have to go fairly slow on because it just takes forever. But at least I'd get like quicker rewards. It's also easier to like kind of just punch over these hills as opposed to like I just have to keep grinding at these long passes in Colorado.
Yeah. So is it like the Ozarks is like sprinting and the Rockies are like a mile run?
Yeah, that's a good comparison. And I've always been a much more like bursty athlete as opposed to endurance. So it's really more my thing is being able to kind of just power up these hills, barely get over the top, and then just cruise down for a little bit and then try to keep my speed up to power up the next one. I like that more than the grind of the Rockies.
Yeah.
But the Rockies, of course, the grind is not the only aspect to them. So the Rockies were probably overall far more enjoyable because you have these massive mountain ranges, whereas the Ozarks, you don't get that kind of awesome scenery.
It's just kind of mountain and then it's gone.
It's not even, they're just hills. They're just a ton of really steep hills. It actually makes for some really dangerous riding as well because you're constantly in a blind spot because if you go over the hill, then you're down, then a car can come over it from the previous hill and not see you and hit you. It also is very windy. So it's just some of those easily, I think the most dangerous riding, not just like in New York City or whatever, is probably done in the Ozarks because I was off route. So they're not used to seeing cyclists where I was riding. So they're not looking out for you. You're constantly in blind spots. There's zero shoulder whatsoever. that was pretty sketchy riding through the Ozarks.
Did you have any like experiences that scared you as you were riding?
No, I ride with a cycle mirror, so I can see cars coming up behind me, and I was pleasantly surprised. Like the people that live in the Ozarks, they probably are like used to looking out for at least maybe farm equipment and like
Yeah.
farm tractors and stuff on these roads potentially.
Maybe like a
So they
deer
were
or
like
two.
fairly respectful for the most part. They would like, if we're on a hill and I'm climbing up slowly, they wouldn't just pass me on the hill. They would wait till I'm over the hill so they can actually see down the other side for other cars. So I was pleasantly surprised by that. Maybe that's the scariest experience I had is I get so tired when I do these long days. I don't want to sit up in my tent. I just want to be able to get up and go.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just sleep without the tent and just sleep under the stars. And usually my greatest concern with that is just with scorpions when I was in like Utah. But when I was in Kentucky, I did that at like the Kentucky Christian University. I was just kind of hiding behind this wall from campus security because I didn't want them to kick me out. I felt something on my leg, so I like kind of grabbed at it, and it was like hefty, and I could feel it in my hands. So I reflexively just chucked it, and then I could hear it land. So it had like weight to it, and I'm fairly certain that was a big spider. That was probably the most scared. Besides, worry for my fear for myself on the Ozarks. If I could find a way to like write for like a travel agency or something, that would be the ideal case. But to do that, I should probably put together some footage.
And I mean, this will never hurt. What you're doing right now will not hurt your chances at all.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. As a part of that kind of idea, setting off, I bought a drone so I could get some drone footage for this trip. I'm flying it around at Seneca Rocks in West Virginia, and I crashed it into the side of a cliff. I can see like the location of it on my phone. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll just bushwhack all the way over there if I have to. I'm going to try to see if I can find this drone and maybe like knock it down with a branch or whatnot. And then I kind of get over there. The trees are all like over 250 feet high. It's like, okay, this is going to be harder than I thought it was going to be. And then I was looked out. The trail basically took me right to the base of this cliff. So I didn't have to actually bushwhack that part. I climbed up. The cliff is like an established rock climbing route, and it was above the first section of that cliff. So I climbed above the first cliff and just by like going around it. And so it's on the second cliff, which is not an established rock climbing route area. And it was somewhere up there, and I could hear it beeping because I can like make it do that when I'm trying to look for it.
It's like a find my iPhone, find my iDrone.
Exactly. Then I tried working my way around above that cliff, and I could not get to this drone. It was like if I had crashed it either 20 feet lower, it would have just bounced off the rocks and fallen down, and I probably would have at least gotten my SD card, even if my drone was broken. If I'd crashed it 20 feet higher, I probably could have accessed it from above, but I crashed it in the worst spot. I ended up recruiting a rock climber who was in the area, and they brought all of their gear out. They went up this cliff looking for my drone for a while. Like I spent 4 hours with this woman, Holly. She couldn't find it, and all she wanted, she risked her like life and bodily well-being and spent hours with me on this cliff. But all she asked for is some beer, so I bought her some beer. But I told her, she mentioned that there was this like Facebook climbing group for the Seneca Rocks that was fairly active. She said she could make a post for me. So I said, if you want to offer $200 as a bounty for the return of my drone, I will honor that if you would make a post for it. So she made a post, and then I was in Washington, D.C. the next day because I biked all the way out there, and I got a picture from her with two guys who had ended up getting my drone and rappelled down that cliff. So they'd gone above where I was and were rappelled down and found the drone. So I hear it's being sent out to Boston to meet me there. So I might be able to get some final shots of the conclusion of my trip.
It still works?
But, I don't know. It was dead when they would have found it. I'll have to replace the battery when I get it. It's not waterproof, and it did rain that day and night. So the drone may not work, but at the very least, I should be able to get my SD card, and hopefully that will work. I've learned my lesson about drones and being more cautious.
So now you know your lessons about drones, and you're down $200.
Yes. Well, if the drone still works, it's better than being down $850, which is about what it cost me. So I'll take that.
Thank you for listening to the Human Talk podcast. A huge thank you to Peter May, as well as good luck on the rest of your voyage. If you would like to support Peter or the San Lorenzo High Environmental Club, all of the links are going to be in the description below. If you would like to track Peter as he finishes his adventure, visit ca2ma.com, which is also listed in the description. If you enjoyed, remember to come back next time for more Human Talk.
I think you have to be a little bit crazy to cross the country on a bike.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
that
a very interesting thing to do, but it's something that you can say you did now.
It's definitely, there is a large bragging rights factor to my trip. So I agree with that.